Something curious happens to those who perceive reality with unusual clarity. Not the clarity of intellect, but the clarity of perception, the kind that notices the faint tremors beneath ordinary life. These individuals do not collapse because they are weak or overwhelmed. They collapse because they are awake in a world that rarely notices the conditions it lives inside. Most people move through existence the way travelers cross a familiar road. They step confidently because the ground beneath them always feels solid. But a hyperconscious mind begins to sense something different, a subtle instability beneath the routines, ambitions, and meanings that society constructs. Not a dramatic danger, not a visible threat. More like a faint vibration underfoot, something small enough for most to ignore, but strong enough to unsettle the ones attuned to it. Those who see most clearly are the ones who falter first. Not because they lack strength, but because perception reaches deeper than the structures built to contain them. When a person feels the world in high resolution, even ordinary moments carry weight. Even simple days reveal fractures. Even small expectations strain the psyche. Their collapse is often invisible to others. They continue speaking, working, smiling, contributing on the surface. Inside, however, something grows thin. Something begins to shimmer with tension. Something warns that the life around them demands more than the spirit can quietly bear. Awareness works like light shining through a crystal. It reveals cracks before they widen. It exposes tension before it snaps. It shows truths before others notice anything at all. And this early detection, this intuitive sensing, becomes the very thing that bends them, because a hyperconscious person is not walking on the same ground as everyone else. They are walking on something far more delicate, something beautiful, transparent and frighteningly honest. Understanding why hyperconscious minds break down requires stepping back from the familiar rhythm of modern life. Most people assume collapse happens because the world is stressful or because individuals lack resilience. The truth is more subtle. Collapse begins long before exhaustion, long before burnout, long before anything looks wrong from the outside. Deep feelers live as if they're walking across a bridge made of glass. Every step reveals the depth beneath them. Every shift echoes through the structure. Every vibration travels straight into their nervous system. Other people walk across the same span, but their senses soften the experience. They feel only the surface. They hear only the obvious. They trust the bridge because they never notice the microfractures forming inside it. Hyperconscious minds perceive these fractures instantly. A single expectation from society becomes a faint crack. A casual conversation filled with hidden tension becomes another fault line. A day filled with obligations adds a new web of pressure beneath their feet. Nothing catastrophic happens in the moment, but each small vibration accumulates. Living on a glass bridge means the world is always slightly louder, slightly sharper, slightly heavier. Not because reality itself is extreme, but because perception penetrates through the superficial layers others rely on for comfort. The glass bridge does not lie. It reveals everything: the instability, the pressure, the weight of unspoken expectations, the collective anxiety humming beneath society. This sensitivity is not a flaw. It is a form of early detection. Before the bridge shakes visibly, deep feelers feel the trembling. Before cracks become dangerous, they sense the tension forming in the structure. Before anyone else slows down, they are already pausing, listening, evaluating whether the next step is safe for their inner world. Modern society does not accommodate this depth. Life is arranged for those who cannot feel the tremor. The culture moves with confidence because it does not recognize fragility. It only recognizes speed, productivity, and forward motion. The glass bridge becomes dangerous not because it is weak, but because the people designed the system for a different kind of footstep. Hyperconscious individuals live in a mismatch between their nervous system and the invisible architecture of the world. Their perception gives them truths others never face. Their bodies register realities society does not acknowledge. Their minds absorb layers of meaning that most glide over unconsciously. This is why collapse appears early for them, not from fragility, but from fidelity to what is real. Not from failure, but from refusing to ignore cracks that could shatter the entire bridge later. Living this way makes collapse inevitable at some point, because there comes a moment when the glass beneath them reveals too much truth to keep walking as if nothing is wrong. And that moment marks the beginning of the transformation. Equals. Walking across a glass bridge shapes daily life in ways that are almost impossible to explain to others. Nothing dramatic appears on the surface. Work continues. Tasks get done. Conversations unfold as usual. But beneath that ordinary rhythm, something far more delicate is happening. A slight tremor underfoot becomes a signal the body cannot ignore. Most people step forward without hesitation. Deep feelers pause because the vibration feels like a warning. Not a danger of falling, but a danger of losing themselves under weight no one else seems to notice. Simple situations gain an unexpected heaviness. A crowded room feels like standing over a stretch of glass that hums with thousands of footsteps. A tense conversation makes the entire floor seem thinner. Even small decisions can feel like choosing which tile will hold and which will crack. These sensations do not come from anxiety. They arise from awareness. The bridge magnifies everything, tone shifts, emotional undercurrents, unspoken expectations. Others walk through these environments unaware of the subtle pressure they contribute. Hyperconscious minds receive it all directly, without filters. A sense of quiet displacement follows. Life moves around them with confident strides, while their steps become careful and deliberate. They observe the confidence of those who cannot feel the tremor and wonder why their own body responds as if the ground might shift at any moment. This difference creates an invisible gap between them and the world. A personal scene captures this perfectly. Picture someone sitting in a meeting room while the conversation flows around the table. Colleagues speak with assured voices. Laughter cuts through the air, yet beneath the surface, something feels off, a subtle tension, a misalignment, a heaviness no one acknowledges. The hyperconscious individual feels the glass flex beneath the group's collective weight. The others feel only the table, the chairs, the moment. The deep feeler senses the structure. Daily life becomes a balance between participation and preservation. Stepping too quickly risks overwhelming the senses. Stepping too quietly creates distance from others. Finding the middle ground requires constant awareness, constant calibration, constant listening to subtle cues that most people never perceive. This continuous attunement is exhausting in ways that cannot be explained through ordinary language. It isn't fear, it isn't fragility, it's the cost of feeling truth before truth becomes visible. People walking on solid paths never understand why someone on a glass bridge hesitates, slows, or suddenly stops. They do not hear the warning hum. They do not feel the thinness of the world beneath their feet. And because of that, the first cracks always appear inside them before anywhere else. Several invisible currents shape the inner landscape of a hyperconscious mind long before collapse becomes visible to others. These currents move quietly, like subterranean rivers running beneath a crystalline structure. Each current carries a distinct texture, a distinct vibration, and each one subtly shifts the balance of the person walking across the glass bridge. A first current rises from the way perception stretches beyond the surface of experience. Most people encounter events. Deep feelers encounter the resonance of those events. A simple exchange carries emotional frequencies, subtext, tension, micro-expressions, and the weight of everything left unsaid. The world becomes a layered composition, and their nervous system registers every layer as clearly as the outermost one. This cumulative sensitivity gradually thins the inner buffer that others rely on. Another current forms from the constant act of internal translation. Seeing deeply means interpreting reality through a lens others don't even know exists. While someone else navigates a moment based on what is visible, the hyperconscious person must navigate what is visible and what is implied and what is unspoken. This ongoing translation absorbs attention, energy, and emotional bandwidth. The bridge beneath them doesn't merely support footsteps, it absorbs meanings. A third current arises from the mismatch between internal truth and external expectation. Society moves with a kind of confident simplicity. It demands clarity even when the situation is nuanced. It requires answers even when the inner world is still forming questions. Hyperconscious minds live in a space where complexity is natural, and this complexity often clashes with the straightforward momentum of the collective. The tension between authenticity and expectation becomes another hairline crack across the bridge. Another current flows from emotional osmosis. Deep feelers absorb atmospheres. They sense collective moods. They register subtle shifts in tone long before anyone else acknowledges them. Walk into a room where no one speaks, and they still feel the storm gathering beneath the silence. The glass beneath their feet vibrates not only with their own weight, but with the emotional weight of everyone around them. There is also a current created by the paradox of awareness itself. Perceiving more means carrying more. Understanding more means feeling more. Noticing instability means confronting truths others can postpone indefinitely. Awareness widens the inner horizon, but it also exposes the cost of walking in a world built for simpler perceptions. Another current emerges from existential sensitivity. Deep feelers sense the impermanence behind routine. They feel the transience behind ambition. They detect the fragility behind structures society treats as permanent. Most people walk with confidence because they never look down. Hyperconscious minds cannot avoid looking down. The glass is transparent for them in a way it is not for others. And one more current pulses beneath all the others, the quiet ache of witnessing humanity sleepwalk through its own fragile architecture. Seeing the cracks others ignore creates a kind of lonely sorrow, not judgment, not superiority, simply the grief of feeling the world more deeply than the world feels itself. These invisible currents do not break the glass bridge in a single moment. They erode stability, slowly, elegantly, silently. Collapse arrives only when the forces beneath the surface finally ask for a reckoning, a moment of truth. A hyperconscious mind can no longer walk past. Reaching the point where the glass bridge can no longer hold is not the disaster it appears to be. Observers often interpret that moment as psychological collapse, spiritual exhaustion, or emotional burnout. From the outside, it looks like a breaking point. From the inside, however, something entirely different unfolds. Something ancient, inevitable, and strangely beautiful. The hyperconscious mind does not shatter when the bridge becomes unstable. It descends. This descent resembles the journey of a deep-sea diver slipping below the surface of a vast ocean. The surface world is familiar. Sunlight, salty air, predictable waves, sounds that travel clearly, and a feeling of being held by gravity. No one questions this environment because it is where most people spend their entire lives. Dropping beneath the surface changes everything. Water swallows sound, bends light, and bends time. Breathing becomes intentional. Perception expands in some directions and contracts in others. The deeper the descent, the more the body feels the weight of the water pressing in from all sides. A diver who moves too quickly toward the ocean floor risks severe decompression trauma. Organs rebel. Blood chemistry destabilizes. The body protests violently, not because the ocean is hostile, but because adaptation takes time. Pressure de mon respect. Hyperconscious individuals experience a similar metamorphosis when the world above becomes unusable. The mind that once functioned reasonably well at the surface begins to register intensities others don't feel. Every thought sharpens. Every emotional current becomes amplified. Every unspoken truth echoes inside the body like a wave slamming against a hollow cavern. This overwhelming clarity does not signify collapse. It signals that the surface is no longer a safe environment for perception that refined. Awareness begins drawing the person downward, not as retreat, but as necessity. The descent feels like grief at first. The diver leaves behind the world of chatter, ambition, small talk, bright lights, and the soft illusion that life is simple. Attachments loosen. Old motivations lose their meaning. Patterns of identity peel away layer by layer, the same way sunlight dissolves, the deeper one travels underwater. The process often confuses those watching from above. They see a friend withdrawing. They see a colleague slowing down. They see a family member becoming quiet, private, harder to reach. To them it resembles someone sinking into darkness. Yet the person descending feels no darkness. They feel gravity pulling them toward truth. They feel layers of noise thinning out. They feel the internal pressure stabilizing with each meter of depth. The deeper they go, the more natural the environment becomes. At around these depths, emotional transformation shifts into something luminous. The ocean floor is not barren. Life glows down there. Creatures carry their own light, not borrowed from the sun, but generated from within. The diver begins to see beauty invisible to surface dwellers, beauty that exists only under immense pressure. Hyperconscious minds recognize themselves in this metaphor. They realize the descent was not loss, but entry into a more honest dimension of being. They recognize that the glass bridge felt dangerous because it was too shallow for their nature. They recognize that every vibration sensed at the surface was a signal urging them toward deeper waters where their perception finally makes sense. Once the pressure equalizes, something extraordinary happens. Breathing becomes effortless again. Thoughts lose their frantic edge. Sensitivity turns from burden to navigation. The weight of the world no longer crushes, it balances. Just as a diver becomes part of the surrounding water, the hyperconscious soul becomes part of a depth that welcomes them. A realization rises slowly. Like a glowing organism drifting upward through the dark, the descent saved them. The collapse was a doorway. The fall was a return. No one at the surface understands how necessary that journey was. But the one who descended feels it with every cell. The pressure that once frightened them becomes the environment where they can finally exist without fracturing. This is why some people never make it back to the surface in the same form. They don't return broken. They return transformed, calmer, deeper, more spacious inside, more attuned to reality than ever before. And when they look back at the bridge that once carried them, they see it clearly for the first time, not as a place they failed to cross, but as the place that revealed they were never meant to live above the water in the first place. Re-emerging from the deep requires a different kind of movement than the descent. The shift cannot be rushed. The inner world, like the body of a diver, needs time to adjust to changing pressure. Returning to ordinary life does not mean climbing back onto the glass bridge. It means learning to move through the world with the stability gained at the ocean floor. The first movement of integration begins quietly. Thoughts settle into a slower orbit. Events no longer strike with the same force. The emotional landscape becomes less reactive because it now stretches across a wider internal space. What once overwhelmed now enters a system that has learned how to distribute weight rather than absorb it in a single point. Conversations also change their texture. A hyper-conscious mind no longer engages from the surface. Listening becomes deeper, almost theological. Words are heard, but so is the silence beneath them. The diver brings back an ability to discern which interactions nourish and which ones fracture the inner structure. This discernment guides choices in ways that feel more instinctive than deliberate. Daily rhythms shift as well. Actions lose their frantic urgency and gain a sense of presence. Even simple tasks carry a quiet precision because the mind is no longer stretched thin by unseen pressures. Some activities naturally fall away, not through rejection, but because they no longer align with the internal gravity discovered at depth. Other activities emerge with surprising clarity, as if old fragments of self have risen from the seabed to show where life now wants to flow. Relationships undergo their own form of recalibration. Depth changes the terms of connection. The diver recognizes who can meet them with spaciousness and who remains bound to surface-level perception. This recognition doesn't create distance through superiority. It creates boundaries through harmony. People who resonate with the new frequency remain. The rest drift gently to the periphery. A new rhythm forms around inner signals rather than external demands. The body acts as a compass. The breath becomes a barometer. The subtle tremors sensed before collapse are now used as information instead of threats. This opens a kind of navigational freedom unavailable to those who have never descended. Integration also brings an unexpected clarity about effort. Strain is no longer acceptable as a default. If an environment requires self-betrayal to function within it, the choice becomes simple. The diver steps aside rather than forcing themselves into shapes that contradict what the depth has taught. This is not avoidance, it is ecological self-respect. A final layer of integration reveals itself during quiet moments. Stillness feels different now, not as emptiness, but as continuity. The ocean floor follows the diver back into everyday life, not as memory, but as atmosphere. The world above appears softer, more permeable, more interconnected. Nothing about the surface has changed. The eyes returning to it have. Crossing back into ordinary life after touching the ocean floor creates a subtle but irreversible shift. The world no longer feels like a place that must be endured. It feels more like a landscape observed from a higher altitude of awareness. People hurry across their solid ground with the same unquestioned certainty as before. Their movements remain loud, quick, and unexamined. Yet something inside you stays anchored in the stillness discovered below. A peculiar clarity forms whenever you watch others cross their invisible bridges. Cracks you once feared now appear simply as part of the architecture of being human. The tremors that used to unsettle you become signals you can read, rather than burdens you must carry. Interactions gain transparency. Situations reveal their underlying patterns without effort. Choices become strangely weightless because you are no longer choosing from fear of collapse. Perspective widens the way the horizon widens for a climber rising above the clouds. Noise loses its power. Conflict becomes less personal. Even uncertainty carries a gentleness you never noticed before. The diver's descent has given you depth. Now the sky gives you distance. Relationships enter this new sky as well. Some connections soften naturally, not out of disappointment, but out of understanding. Others deepen because they can resonate with the steadiness you now carry. Nothing needs to be forced. Everything takes its rightful place with almost effortless precision. The bridge you once walked still exists, but it no longer defines your path. You've learned the texture of deeper waters and the spaciousness of higher air. The surface world may remain the same, yet your presence within it now feels like a different kind of gravity, quieter, clearer, more aligned with the truth you brought back from below. Every descent eventually leads to a moment when the inner world stops trembling, not because the environment has grown safer, but because your relationship to it has changed. Awareness settles into the body like a new kind of gravity. The mind no longer braces for impact with every step. Breath moves in patterns that feel ancient, familiar, and strangely compassionate. Moving through life from this state resembles walking beside your former self on the glass bridge. The old version of you watches the surface for cracks, listening for the slightest vibration. The new version simply observes. Nothing is denied, yet nothing consumes you the way it once did. Experience becomes clearer, almost translucent, as if light passes through moments instead of getting trapped inside them. A quiet realization rises from this clarity. Collapse was not the ending. Collapse was the invitation. The descent was not a failure. It was the path your nature had been pointing toward long before you recognized the signs. Depth revealed what surface living could never show, that the soul carries an intelligence older than fear, older than conditioning, older than the structures society asks you to balance upon. Holding this understanding allows you to walk differently. Conversations soften. Days expand. Expectations lose their authority. Even the weight of the world feels lighter, not because it weighs less, but because your center of gravity has moved closer to truth. If the bridge begins to shake again, you won't panic. You've learned there is an ocean beneath every moment, and you know how to breathe there. You've learned that descent is not collapse, but recalibration. And you've learned that the depth you found once will always remain available, the way still water waits beneath the restless surface of the sea. The journey is not over. It has only become more honest,